All right. For this lecture, it's going to be fairly short, pretty quick here to wrap up our Great Depression and New Deal unit. This week is our last week before the winter break, and that's exciting. And you can kind of see a little bit of what's coming. I'm recording this lecture right now. Over the rest of the week, you've got a short answer assessment, a reading check, multiple choice, and then you need to get your New Deal essay turned into me by Thursday. As long as you get those things checked off this week and you can kind of work at your own pace on that, you'll be able to have a relatively free day on Friday. I'm going to be using Friday to check grades and message people about missing work and wishing everybody a happy holidays and a Merry Christmas and all of that. So that's kind of what your week looks like. What I want to talk about here, though, is what I'm going to call the legacy of the New Deal. The Great Depression, the worst economic situation in American history. FDR was elected president right in the middle of it. Herbert Hoover served one term and was not reelected. So clearly, the American people were not happy with the direction that he was moving us in during the Depression. And FDR came in with this New Deal, an active government, lots of spending, lots of programs and initiatives and regulations that he said was going to fix this depression. What we need to look at today, and this is partly what you're doing in your essay, is did it work? And if some parts did work and if some parts didn't, what are the parts that are still around and impacting us today? What is its legacy? So first, I want to show you. I'm going to show you this chart again. One way to break down the New Deal and its legacy is to go back to our 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. We might think of this as short term, medium term, and long term. Most of these things on the left hand side, the CCC, the Federal Emergency Relief Act, they came and they went. They were immediate, and you can kind of judge in the first few years, did that make people feel better? Did it put people back to work? And the answer is probably going to be yes. These middle columns, the two big ones, the AAA and the NRA, we said were ruled unconstitutional. It's going to be hard to say that that was effective if the New Deal passed agencies and laws that were then overturned. These had very short lifespans, and maybe they would have worked, maybe they wouldn't, but they weren't up to code in terms of the American Constitution. Finally, when you get to these reform measures, things like the SEC, the FDIC, the Social Security Administration, and the National Labor Relations Board, all of these are still in place today. If you look back then, the FDIC insured bank deposits up to $5,000. When this sheet was made, it was $100,000. Now the federal government guarantees your bank deposit up to $250,000. The Securities Exchange Commission still monitors the stock market. If you're going to trade on the stock market, you're going to have to submit your company to be examined and vetted by the SEC, and they monitor. They're a watchdog to make sure that people aren't setting up fraudulent companies and trading stocks in an unsecure way. And finally, of course, Social Security. This is a safety net program. It's got problems, and there's lots of talk about whether the Social Security funds are going to be there for future generations as Americans live longer and population gets bigger. But this is a program that's lasted the better part of 80, 90 years, and so all of these kind of reform measures of the New Deal are probably a big indicator of its legacy. The fact that so many things are still around almost 100 years later is a big indicator. Doesn't mean that they're all effective, but there is a legacy there. I'll show you one other chart. I gotta find it here. This is an interesting chart on unemployment statistics. When FDR came in as president in 1933. There were almost 13 million people unemployed. That was 25% of the overall population. If you look over here at this percentage, this is unemployment of non-farm workers. So it's even higher when you take out farm workers. But a huge chunk of the American population was unemployed. And part of what FDR was doing with the New Deal was, I'm going to put people back to work. And when he comes into office in 1933, you can see in the first, 4 to 7 years of um, of his presidency, unemployment significantly declines. You can't really see this number, but that says 700,000. So over 5 million people were put back to work by the New Deal. Now, you'll also see that it spikes back up right here. Um, and a lot of students, when you see this graph, they say, okay, so what's going on here? Well, you have to remember, starting about right here on this graph is when New Deal programs began to be ruled unconstitutional. So you can look at this two ways. FDR said, look, the New Deal was working, but then when the courts got involved, it undercut the New Deal. Other people who are critical of the New Deal say, look, yeah, the New Deal was putting people back to work, but these weren't real jobs. These weren't careers. We talked about the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and how the guys went out to national parks and they dug ditches and they planted trees. Well, that's awesome for lowering unemployment numbers, but you can't plant trees at a park for the rest of your life. That's not a career. And many people looked at this and said, look, yeah, strong government action can reduce something temporarily, but as soon as the government then takes its hands off, the problems came back. The big indicator that you want to see on this is this second downslope is right around when World War II was beginning. World War II began in 1939 for the rest of the world. It began really in 1941, really January 1942 for America. And so a lot of people who are critical of the New Deal, they'll say, well, the New Deal didn't fix the Great Depression. It was World War II. The only thing I would warn you on with that is don't just feel like that's a black and white concrete answer. Fold your arms and put your foot down and be like, see, I made my point. Because if you think about the way that World War II helped to fix the Great Depression, what type of jobs were they? Government jobs. How were those jobs funded? Taxes and tax increases or deficit spending. One criticism of the New Deal is that the national debt doubled during the 1930s. Well, that national debt continued to plummet during World War II with deficit spending. So the nature of how World War II perhaps fixed the Great Depression isn't all that different from the New Deal. It was still government control. It was still deficit spending and increased taxes. And it was still like not permanent jobs. You can't sit there and make bullets for the rest of your life and just always wait for a war to bail out any economic trouble. So did the New Deal work? Yes and no. What's its legacy? Well, one last thing on this. We still have the debate today on what role the government is supposed to play in the economy. Should it be more hands-off, laissez-faire, or should it be more hands-on and planned? But in general, the New Deal did win the argument in the minds of many. Since the New Deal, Republicans and Democrats, both sides of our political spectrum, have continued to use New Deal measures. So, for example, when Wall Street collapsed in 2008, the Obama administration passed stimulus packages and bailouts for different companies that were too big to fail. But before the Obama administration came in, George W. Bush and the Republican Party also passed the first big stimulus package and bailout. On the other side of the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and Trump and his administration have very much, in terms of rhetoric, said, hey, we're a hands-off small government party. However, amidst this coronavirus pandemic, President Trump and Republican leadership did pass a stimulus package back in June to assist families through this time. And they're actually talking about passing another one, albeit there is debate and controversy over the more recent one. The point being that Republicans and Democrats believe in New Deal measures in today's world. Both believe that when the economy gets bad, the government needs to step in, regulate, provide safety nets, and often stimulate the economy through spending. We still debate how much is appropriate. Democrats tend to favor more and Republicans less. But by 1930 standards, both Republicans and Democrats today are really believers in the New Deal. So that's another way to maybe spin the legacy talk. All right, that's it. When we come back after the holidays, we'll be talking about World War II, so that'll be really interesting. Please stop into my office hours this week if you guys have any questions, you want to talk about your essays. Remember, if you can get your essays turned in early, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I can always give you feedback and you can resubmit for a better grade. Several people have already done that. So work hard on your assignments this week, get your essay finished, and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.